Christopher crossed the threshold of the laboratory, immersing himself in the atmosphere of his first day as the head of the unit. Just a month earlier, he had a job interview with his predecessor, about whom he only knew that due to an unexpected family situation, he had to leave several hundred kilometers away. An unpleasant feeling overwhelmed him at the sight of the corridor. The laboratory, inherited from his predecessor, was somewhat neglected, and the age of the facility was evident almost at first glance. It was a depressing prospect, although expected, considering that he found himself in a small, somewhat forgotten town. He took this position for two reasons. Not only did he get the position as the head of the unit, but also the town where he was born became the place he had to return to. His father, struggling with dementia, needed care, and as an only child, Christopher felt obligated to support him. These circumstances converged in such a surprising way that he began to suspect that fate had a hand in it. He still knew a few people from the laboratory from childhood and school years, so he wasn't overly stressed about adapting to the new team. While walking through the corridor, he noticed a woman carrying something that looked like a baby. He shook his head in disbelief. The thought arose in his mind that it was probably due to lack of sleep, as he stayed up all night watching a TV series instead of going to bed early. He sat at his desk in his office, glancing at the task-filled calendar for the day. Suddenly, he heard a sound, as if a baby was crying. With disbelief, he decided he urgently needed a strong coffee. But when he entered the break room, he froze in place. Nothing, but absolutely nothing, could prepare him for this sight. Dominique was standing there, holding a baby in her arms. Surprised, he could only ask, "Is this your baby?" She shook her head negatively. When Christopher regained control over the first waves of surprise and irritation, he asked whose baby it was. She replied that Anita takes care of the baby, wanting to add something else, but an irritated Christopher had already left the room, slamming the door. The baby's crying immediately intensified. As he walked down the corridor in search of Anita, Christopher tried to recall if he had missed something. He had talked to his father about the residents of their town, and before his father started suffering from dementia, he also worked here and knew every piece of gossip. His father never mentioned that Anita had a husband, let alone a child. Of course, he could have forgotten, considering his dementia, but they discussed Anita several times. She went to the same class with Christopher in primary school and then also in high school. Christopher was in love with her, but Anita always rejected his advances. Later, they went to separate colleges, and the topic of their romance faded away. Truth be told, since his father kept saying that Anita was single, fully immersed in her work, Christopher began to have hope. Maybe, since she's single, just like him, some feelings will revive in him, and she will look at him more favorably. However, now Christopher was furious, mainly because some child wandered around his laboratory. The whole situation was compounded by the fact that this was Anita's child, his former love, which meant she was with someone and, moreover, had a child with him. Anger and pity made him lose control. He finally reached the room where Anita was about to place a test tube in the centrifuge. He burst in, furious, and started shouting that she must leave immediately and take that brat with her, or better yet, never come back because he will fire her on the spot. Anita froze in place, and the test tube slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. What was he doing here, and what's more, what right does he have to talk about firing her? With difficulty, she managed to say that it's a baby, not a brat, and asked what he was doing here. Christopher shouted at her that he is the head of this unit, and she is unbelievably irresponsible, bringing her baby to the laboratory. Christopher was shocked that someone could bring a child to a place that should be sterile, where various substances, even viruses, were being examined. There was always a risk that the child could get infected with something unknown or, even worse, bring in a virus that could mutate with something present in the laboratory. The thought of what could happen was terrifying. Anita knew he was right, but he didn't have to lash out at her like that. Christopher still yelled, claiming that since she couldn't take care of the child, her husband should do it. Anita shook her head, saying that she doesn't have a husband, and the child doesn't have a father because he turned out to be a jerk, one of the worst in the world. She added that he should reflect on himself and his behavior and finally start acting like a real man, not a jerk. Christopher didn't understand her words, but he was so angry that he told her that if someone like him intends to treat her this way, then she has to face the consequences. And if she doesn't know what to do with the child, she should go on welfare and stay at home. For Anita, that was too much. She announced that if someone like him is going to treat her this way, she will resign. Besides, it's her first day, so there's nothing keeping her there. Anita went to the break room, took the baby from Dominic, and drove home with screeching tires. It couldn't be hidden that the entire laboratory heard their exchange. Christopher was convinced that safety is the most important thing, and he was entirely justified in his reaction. He went to his room to calm down and gather his thoughts. After about 15 minutes, Dominic came to his room. Dominic also knew Christopher from childhood. They lived next door to each other. She said they needed to urgently resolve the replacement issue for Anita because that day they were supposed to deliver the final results of the samples and analyses. Postponing the deadline was not an option, and since Anita had left, work was at a standstill without a replacement. Christopher decided that he couldn't mess up on his first day, so he would take care of it himself. Dominic had to assist him, and if she had any plans for the evening, she would have to cancel them because they would probably work late. Dominic agreed, and they went to the laboratory where the recent altercation took place. After several hours of work, Christopher's nerves completely snapped. He started questioning Dominic if she knew more about Anita and her child and the father of the child. From what Anita told him, there was no husband. Dominic told him that if he was asking regardless of the fact that he was her boss, because they had known each other since childhood, she thinks like Anita that he's a terrible jerk for how he treated her. Christopher's face turned sour, and he realized he really behaved like a fool. Dominic continued speaking. She said they had grown up together, and if he wanted to say something, he could have expressed his dissatisfaction like a human being. Christopher reflected for a moment and then added that it's true, he exploded too much, and he might consider apologizing to Anita. But she won't be taken back to work. However, he decided to spare himself writing up a disciplinary notice. As he already explained, he asked Dominic to tell him more about the child. To Christopher's surprise, Dominic said that nobody told him that the child belongs to Anita. In the break room, she only told him that Anita takes care of the child, but not that she is the mother. Christopher's expression changed, and he realized that he had truly acted like a jerk. Dominic continued speaking. She said the child is her sister's, who had a car accident and died. No one knew who the father of the child was. She had no other family left, so Annabelle had to return urgently and take care of the baby. She came back just before the weekend, and today was her first day at work. She couldn't find a babysitter for the weekend, so she had to take the baby with her. Moreover, to be honest, it was Dominic's idea because she promised to take care of the baby herself since she was just sitting at the reception. Christopher blushed with shame. He attacked Annabelle, and she unexpectedly found herself in such a difficult situation. She had just lost her sister in such tragic circumstances, and now she had to suddenly take care of the baby. Women prepare for motherhood for at least 9 months, if not longer, and she had to take care of such a little one abruptly while still grieving for her sister. He decided they needed to roll up their sleeves and work faster because he needed to go to her and apologize for his idiotic behavior. Christopher didn't take any breaks. He quickly performed all the necessary tests, wrote a report, and handed it over to Dominic for delivery. Then, he quickly gathered himself and left. On the way, he realized that he couldn't show up empty-handed, so he had to stop at a store to buy something. He entered the shop, and the first thing that caught his eye was the flowers. He decided that he should buy flowers and maybe some chocolates. As he was heading towards the cashier, he suddenly remembered that there was still the baby. Though it was an infant, it was crying and slamming doors, causing the baby to cry even more. He thought he should buy something for the baby as an apology. He went to the baby section and grabbed a rattle before heading to the cashier and driving to Annabelle's place. To be honest, he forgot to ask Dominique where she lived, but he assumed she must live in her family home since her sister passed away, and the house was probably empty. Christopher parked the car in the driveway and rang the doorbell. After a moment, accompanied by the sound of a crying baby, Annabelle opened the door, holding the baby in her arms. There was a flicker of angry emotion in her eyes. She accused him of taking things too far. Again, he came and frightened the baby. He had just put the baby to sleep and was about to lay it in the crib when the unexpected doorbell woke it up. Christopher felt embarrassed. He said he wouldn't leave until they talked. He offered to wait in the car while Annabelle put the baby back to sleep. He knew he had acted like a complete idiot, and he wouldn't leave without a conversation. He needed to apologize. Annabelle sighed with irritation, saying she didn't want to see him because he had caused her so much pain and tragedy that she wouldn't return to work as long as he was there. Christopher confessed that he didn't understand anything, but he promised that he wouldn't rest until they talked. He went to wait in the car. Anita closed the door in front of his face and went to take care of the baby. The baby fell asleep quickly. Anita looked through the window to see if Christopher had already left, but he was still waiting outside her house. It was well past midnight, and she wanted to go to bed and rest after such a stressful day. To make matters worse, it started pouring rain, and the air turned chilly. Finally, Anita gave in and opened the door, calling Christopher inside. Drenched from the rain, Christopher entered her home. He quickly undressed and handed her the flowers, chocolates, and the rattle for the baby. Anita threw the flowers and chocolates in the trash with a sarcastic expression on her face. Then, she looked at the rattle, burst into laughter, and threw it away too, stating that a baby named Casper wouldn't play with a pink toy. With eyes full of anger and disdain, she told him to keep his visit as short as possible and leave. But Christopher decided not to give up and openly confessed his feelings. He said as the head of the unit, he was responsible for their safety, and he understood the risks of working in the laboratory. He admitted that Anita's behavior, bringing the baby to work, was inappropriate, but he realized that he had overreacted by yelling and screaming throughout the laboratory. He knew he had offended her by accusing her of having a child with an unknown man. He admitted feeling ashamed and sincerely apologized. He hoped that Anita would return to the team, provided she found a babysitter for the baby. Christopher continued, saying that he reacted so nervously because, despite everything, he had always had feelings for her, even though she constantly rejected him. He thought that since they were both single now, maybe the old feelings between them would revive. But when he found out she had a child, which suggested the presence of another man in her life, he couldn't hide his anger. He knew there was no excuse for his behavior, but despite that, he wanted to apologize and offer his help if she would just ask for it. Anita couldn't hide her anger. She declared that she didn't need his help, but since he had come, he should take full responsibility and pay child support without arguments or dragging the matter through the courts. Christopher couldn't believe what he heard. He was so surprised that he questioned her sobriety. Before he could respond, Anita exploded, saying that there was no turning back now. Creating the child was one thing, but afterward, there was no way to turn around and wash one's hands of it, as if nothing had happened. Now, on top of everything, he mentions his feelings for her, even though he was with her sister. Honestly, he has no trace of honor or shame in him. Christopher couldn't utter a word as Annabelle began talking about his alleged affair with her sister, which resulted in the baby. Hundreds of thoughts were swirling in his head. Finally, with focus, he said that he couldn't understand what Annabelle was talking about. If she insists so much, they can immediately go to the laboratory and conduct paternity tests. Annabelle froze in place, unable to believe that her sister could deceive her. Christopher gently placed his hand on Annabelle's shoulder. he suggested moving the conversation to the living room, assuring her that it wasn't the end of the discussion. Chaos reigned in the house, and Annabelle couldn't hide the neglected state of the place. She awkwardly explained that she planned to renovate, but the burden imposed by her sister's pregnancy and then her death was too overwhelming. During the long conversation, Annabelle told him about her sister, with whom she had sporadic contact. She found out about the pregnancy when her sister was already far along. The woman was in a terrible state and didn't want to reveal who the father of the child was. Annabelle suspected that the breakup with the child's father pushed her sister into depression, and the pregnancy only deepened her condition. When Annabelle found out about the pregnancy, she decided to help her sister. She took her in, resigned from work in the meantime, and sorted out her affairs. They planned to return permanently to their hometown as a family of 3. One evening, her sister said that she urgently needed to go to the store, leaving the baby with Annabelle. That night, her sister died in a car accident, which the police believed was deliberate. Moments before her death, her sister regained consciousness, and Annabelle pleaded with her to tell her who the father of the child was. Her sister finally replied that it was the laboratory manager. She didn't have a chance to say anything else. After the funeral, Annabelle came here and got a job in the laboratory. Christopher still insisted that he wasn't the father, but Annabelle was convinced that her sister wouldn't lie to her on her deathbed, and he was just trying to avoid paying child support. However, if Christopher stuck to his claim, he needed to be prepared to prove it in court. He stated that he couldn't be the father because he only came to the town a month ago, and today was his first day at work. Suddenly, it dawned on Annabelle. She realized that it must have been the previous laboratory manager, not Christopher. The previous manager had only left the town recently, and there were rumors that his family situation forced him to do so. Christopher recalled hearing those rumors, that the previous manager had to leave town because he was cheating on his wife, and she gave him an ultimatum: either they stay and get divorced, or they leave and try to save their marriage. The previous manager, of course, washed his hands of the situation and disappeared into the shadows of events. Christopher's father didn't mention which girl had turned the manager's head. Annabelle covered her face with her hands, and tears started flowing down her cheeks. Christopher gently embraced her, whispering that he would help her in any difficult situation. He revealed that he still felt something more for her and asked only for a more favorable look. Annabelle, overwhelmed by emotions, replied that she once had feelings for him too. However, she was young and reckless, so she rejected him, dreaming that somewhere in the big world, a prince on a white horse was waiting for her. In response to her words, Christopher brought his face closer to hers, and she kissed him passionately. Christopher declared that he would like to create a family with Annabelle for little Casper. Annabelle, filled with warmth, hugged him tightly. Their kisses became more passionate, and love led them to the bedroom. Annabelle couldn't believe that amidst all the misfortunes that recently befell her, she found her happiness and love. Now she knew that together with Christopher, they could overcome any problem. The feeling that ignited in their hearts gave them the strength to face all the hardships of fate. Their love was like a lantern, dispersing the darkness of the most difficult moments.